When the fund matures in March, Thomas won't have a single claim left. We take everything and disappear before he even opens the quarterly statement. Those were my wife's words, typed in a spreadsheet she emailed to her lover and accidentally sent to me. 47 columns. 20 months of transfers. $475,000 moved out of our life, while I sat across from her at dinner every night, believing I was the one managing the money. They think I know nothing about that email or what they have been building beneath the surface of our marriage. I did not confront them. I acted as if nothing had happened. 30 days later, with everything I have gathered, I am going to make them answer for what they have done. If you found this story today, I am grateful you are here. Tell me in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Every response reminds me why I keep sharing. Note: this story contains fictional elements added for educational and entertainment purposes. Any similarity to actual names or locations is coincidental, but what it has to teach you is not. My name is Thomas Ashford. I am 60 years old. For the past 32 years, I have been the founding partner of Ashford & Partners, a wealth management firm I built from a borrowed desk in a Back Bay office with radiators that clanked every winter and a name that meant nothing to anyone in Boston. I have been married to Diane Ashford for 26 years. Our son Ryan is 22, a Wharton graduate taking a gap year in Tokyo, a fact that still carries a particular quiet pride every time it surfaces in conversation. We live on Marlborough Street in Back Bay, in a brownstone, with tall front windows and elm trees, old enough to remember a different city. I have driven home to that house every working evening for more than 2 decades. That Friday, the 18th of October, I expected to do exactly the same. But I was still at my desk. My office sits on the 19th floor of a glass tower on Federal Street. From the window behind my chair, I can see Boston Harbor stretching toward the harbor islands, the waterfront cranes, the planes descending into Logan in that slow diagonal that has always looked to me like the city breathing in. I had earned that view over 32 years. I knew how that window looked when the world was manageable. That afternoon, it looked like someone else had built the office and left me inside it by mistake. It was 4:47 when the email arrived. A message from Diane. I assumed it was something ordinary, a note about weekend plans at the Vineyard or a restaurant reservation she wanted confirmed. We shared things that way. The small, everyday passing of information that a long marriage accumulates, the way a house accumulates furniture. I opened it. No text in the body, only an attachment. A spreadsheet. I clicked it open the way I have clicked open 10,000 spreadsheets in my career, with the automatic attention of a man whose entire professional life has been built on reading what numbers say when they are arranged in rows. What I found stopped everything. 47 columns. 20 months of entries. Each row, a wire transfer. Dated, timed, and annotated in a shorthand I did not recognize. Amounts ranging from $8,100 to $9,400. Every single one below the $10,000 threshold that triggers a mandatory currency transaction report under the Bank Secrecy Act. The recipient account was identified only by a routing number and a set of initials I had never seen attached to any account in our shared financial life. M.C. The final row contained no transfer. It contained a projection. Projected exit. March 15th. Total secured. $475,000. Status. Undetected. My father taught me something when I was 23 years old. We were sitting in his study in Concord, and he looked at me directly and said, "Thomas, numbers don't lie, but people structure them too." I had carried that sentence for 37 years. I had used it in boardrooms, in due diligence reviews, in every situation where the arrangement of financial data told a story someone had worked deliberately to obscure. I had never once imagined applying it to my own marriage. Diane called 2 minutes later. Her voice was measured, apologetic in tone, but not rattled. "Hey, I am so sorry. I was putting together some tax planning documents for my accountant, and I sent the wrong file. Please, just delete it. It is so much more complicated than it looks out of context. I knew who Diane's accountant was. I had referred him to her myself 9 years ago. His name was Bernard Kessler. And nothing in that spreadsheet bore any resemblance to any documentation Bernard Kessler had ever produced or received. No worries, I said. I will delete it. A brief pause landed between us. Are you still at the office? She asked. Yeah, I said. Wrapping up. Be home by 6:30. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. Outside the window, Boston Harbor continued its ordinary Friday business. A container ship moving across the outer harbor, the late October light going amber on the waterfront glass, the city proceeding without me. I did not delete the file. I forwarded it to my personal email. I saved a copy to an encrypted folder. I opened the screen recording function on my phone and recorded myself scrolling through the entire spreadsheet from the first entry to the projected exit date, capturing every column, every amount, every annotation. My hands did not shake. 32 years of managing other people's most consequential financial decisions teach you something about keeping steady when the stakes become personal. Then I closed the laptop and drove home. The house on Marlborough Street looked the same from the sidewalk. Warm windows. The porch light Diane turned on when she arrived home before me. The elms throwing their October shadows across the brick. I sat in the car for 2 minutes before going inside. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken. Diane stood at the counter, her back to the doorway, a glass of Sancerre on the granite to her right. She turned when she heard me and came across the kitchen with the unhurried ease of a woman who had been doing exactly this for a very long time. She kissed me on the cheek. How was your Friday? Long, I said. I set my briefcase beside the doorway. Smells good in here. Roasted chicken. Your mother's recipe. Give it 20 minutes. I took my seat at the kitchen table, the same chair I had occupied for dinner every weeknight for 2 decades. And for the first time in recent memory, I truly watched her. Not the glancing attention of a man comfortable in a familiar room. The full, quiet observation of someone who has just learned that what he thought he was seeing and what is actually there are not the same thing. Upstairs in my briefcase, forwarded to an email address only I could access. 47 columns were waiting. $475,000. 20 months. And a projected exit date formatted in the spreadsheet equivalent of red ink. My wife had built a financial architecture inside our marriage, and I had been living inside it for 20 months, without knowing the walls were no longer mine. Dinner was what dinner had been for the better part of 26 years. 2 people at a table, trading the ordinary accounting of a shared life. Diane asked about the Meridian portfolio review, whether Harrison had confirmed the November board date, whether I thought we should book flights to Tokyo to see Ryan after the new year. I answered when an answer was required. I ate the roasted chicken, which was as it always was when Diane made my mother's recipe, genuinely excellent, and I listened to her voice with the attention of a man cataloging something he understands he will not hear in the same way again. There was warmth in it. That was the part I had not expected to still be true, and the part that sat heaviest. I had always read her ease in this kitchen as a kind of contentment, the way she moved between the stove and the counter without hesitation, the way she talked with her hands when she described something that had happened at work, the small decisions she made without pausing, when to lower the heat, when to refill her glass, when to change the subject to something lighter. I was reading it through a different lens now. Not contentment, control. The particular fluency of a person who has been managing an environment so long that the management itself has become invisible. She talked about a colleague's upcoming retirement. She mentioned a dinner she wanted to organize with friends in early December. She asked if I had called the landscaper about the back garden before winter set in. Each question arrived in its proper place, spaced naturally, requiring just enough response to maintain the rhythm of an ordinary evening without demanding anything that might expose the fact that one of the 2 people at that table was no longer participating in the same conversation. After the dishes were cleared, Diane said she was tired and heading up early. She paused in the kitchen doorway, the way she did most evenings, one hand on the frame, half turned toward the stairs. "Don't stay up too late," she said. "I won't," I told her. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs. The familiar compression of the third step. The sound of the bedroom door pulling closed. Then I opened my laptop on the kitchen table. I had kept the banking credentials stored in my memory for years without much occasion to use them, the way you hold a combination that rarely comes up. Diane had managed the household accounts since the early years of our marriage, a division of labor that had seemed at the time like practical efficiency, and which I had never revisited, because there had never been a reason to revisit it. I managed institutional portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars for other people. I had allowed my own household finances to operate on trust. I logged into the joint checking account first. Then I pulled up the joint investment account that held our shared brokerage positions. I was not entirely certain what I was looking for. I was certain enough that something was there to find. I found it in the checking account's outgoing transaction history. 8 transfers over the past 3 months, each routed to an account number I did not recognize. No payee description that corresponded to any expense, subscription, or obligation I could identify. The individual amounts ranged from $8,100 to $9,400, every single one of them below the $10,000 threshold that triggers a mandatory currency transaction report under the Bank Secrecy Act. I noted that detail the way a man who has spent 32 years watching money move notices the specific shape of money that is trying not to be noticed. Someone had chosen these amounts deliberately. Someone understood reporting thresholds and had built transfers to stay beneath them. The intervals between them ranged from 10 days to 22 days. No 2 transfers spaced identically, no 2 amounts repeated. The combined total came to approximately $72,000, moved in measured increments to somewhere I could not trace from where I was sitting. $72,000 was what was visible in the checking account over 3 months. The spreadsheet Diane had sent me by mistake covered 20 months. 47 columns, $475,000. The checking account was the surface. What lay beneath it was several times larger than what the surface showed. The amounts, taken individually, would not alarm a man who was not already alarmed. That was the point. They were sized to stay below the waterline, paced to avoid the pattern recognition systems that flag unusual activity, distributed across enough time to read as routine. Someone had given this structure real thought. Someone had done the specific arithmetic of invisibility. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet around me in the way that old brownstones are quiet at night. The radiators ticking, the floors settling, the particular weighted silence of a building that holds more history than the people inside it know what to do with. At 3:14 in the morning, I reached for the leather notebook I kept in the drawer beside the stove. It was the kind my father had always used. Unlined pages, dark cover, a spine that cracked slightly when you opened it. My father had kept every significant financial observation of his career in notebooks like this, written by hand, dated in the upper right corner. He believed in paper the way he believed in most things that required patience. Paper does not crash. Paper does not get hacked. Paper waits. I opened to the first blank page and wrote in the upper right corner the date. October 18th. Below it, in the handwriting I had inherited from a man who taught me to read numbers before I understood what they could hide, I wrote the following. Spreadsheet received. 47 columns. 20 months. Projected total $475,000. Joint checking confirmation. 8 transfers, 3 months. Approximately $72,000 visible. Amounts structured below Bank Secrecy Act reporting threshold. Destination account unidentified. Initials M period. C period. Do not react. Do not assume. Get information first. I set the pen down and closed the notebook. Upstairs, Diane was sleeping. I could hear nothing through the ceiling, but I knew the rhythm, The slow, even breathing I had witnessed her fall into thousands of times across 26 years of sharing a bed with someone I was now beginning to understand I had never fully known. There was someone who needed to hear this before anyone else. Not my attorney. Not yet. Someone who had spent 22 years sitting on a federal bench, deciding what was true and what was merely arranged to appear that way. Someone I was beginning to suspect might already know more than she had chosen to tell me. I had not slept. By 4 in the morning I had stopped trying. I lay in the dark beside Diane for another hour, listening to the house settle around me the way old brownstones do when the temperature drops, then rose quietly, dressed without turning on any lights, and left before the street outside had found its Saturday morning color. I was at my desk on the 19th floor by 6:50. The cleaning crew was finishing the floors below. My assistant would not arrive until Monday. I poured coffee from the break room and sat at my window looking out at Boston as it assembled itself in the early light, the harbor catching the first pale color of morning, the streets below still quiet, the whole city in that particular suspended state that exists just before the world commits to what it is going to pretend is normal. At 7:15, I picked up my phone and called my older sister. Eleanor Ashford Brennan was 66 years old, 4 years my senior, and had spent 22 years as a federal judge before retiring 3 years ago to a house on Cape Cod where she read case law for pleasure the way other people read novels. She had always been the most methodical person in the family. The one who read every page of a contract before signing, who researched a contractor's work history before allowing him near a wall, who had once spent 3 weeks vetting a roofing company for a job that took 2 days. She was also the person who had known me longest, most consistently, and whose judgment I had trusted without qualification for as long as I could remember. She answered on the second ring. I did not explain. I held the phone up and played the audio of myself scrolling through the spreadsheet, narrating the column headers and key figures aloud as I went. Eleanor listened in silence on the other end for the full duration. When I finished, there was nothing for long enough that I checked the screen to be certain the call had not dropped. 19 seconds. Thomas. Her voice came carefully. How long have you had this? Since yesterday afternoon, I said. And you are still in the house with her. I needed to think first. A slow breath came across the line. Then I need to tell you something. And I need you to let me finish before you respond. I said nothing. She took that as agreement. Eleanor had been at the Whitmore Foundation Gala on the 14th of March, a fundraising event at the Four Seasons Boston that Diane had attended, as Eleanor understood it at the time, with a work contact. She had seen Diane there with a man she did not recognize. They were standing close together in the way that registers before you can name what you are registering. The specific proximity of two people who have chosen each other, the small, almost imperceptible adjustments of position that carry meaning older than language. She had not known his name that evening. She had looked into it afterward. Malcolm Cross, investment advisor, previously based in Seattle, now operating out of a firm on Newbury Street in Boston. I did not say anything because what I had was not evidence, Eleanor said. It was a feeling. And a feeling is not something you hand to your brother and then leave him alone with, not without something real behind it. So she had done what Eleanor Ashford Brennan did when she had a question she could not answer from the bench. I hired someone in April, a private investigator. Discreet, experienced. 3 weeks of surveillance on Malcolm Cross. He came back without a single thing I could hand you. Malcolm was careful. Every meeting happened in professional settings. Nothing that read as more than a business relationship on any record he could access. She paused. I could hear the ocean through whatever window she had open at the Cape Cod house. Or perhaps I was imagining it. Perhaps I needed something ordinary to anchor the conversation to. After April, I did my own research. She continued. Malcolm left a company in Seattle, Cascadia Ventures, his previous firm, under circumstances that no one discussed publicly. There was a legal matter. It was settled quietly. And whatever the details were, they were sealed well enough that I could only find the outline of something that someone had worked deliberately to make unfindable. She stopped. Then, in the voice she had used when she delivered opinions from the bench, the one that carried no uncertainty and required no embellishment. She said, "Thomas, whatever this situation is, I do not think it is only about an affair." I'd been gripping the edge of my desk with my left hand. I let go. 7 months, Eleanor. The 4 words sat in the air between us. There is a kind of silence that functions as its own response. The silence of someone who has understood that an explanation would not reach the thing that needed reaching and has chosen not to offer one. Eleanor had spent 22 years on the federal bench, learning how language works and what it carries. She understood what silence carried too. "I know," she said finally. "I thought about Thanksgiving. 3 weeks away. The whole family around the long table at the Marlborough Street house. Howard making the drive up from Concord. Eleanor arriving with the cranberry walnut bread she brought every year without variation. Diane setting the table with the good china, candles in the holders she had picked up in Bordeaux on our 20th anniversary trip. Everything placed with the careful attention she brought to occasions she considered worth marking. Eleanor had known all of it. Had known for 7 months. And she would sit there anyway, pouring wine and laughing. I pressed my fingertips flat against the edge of the desk. I did not press harder than that. I simply held them there until the thought completed its full passage through me. "There is one more thing," Eleanor said. "In the course of my research, I found a reference I have not been able to confirm. It is attached to Diane's background, not Malcolm's. A legal matter in Scottsdale, Arizona. Mid-1990s. I do not know what it contains. I know it was sealed, and I know someone put considerable effort into ensuring it stayed that way. Scottsdale. A city I had no connection to. A decade I had believed I understood completely because Diane had narrated it to me herself, the years before we met, the version of her life she had given me as context for the one we were building together. "I will call you later," I said. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. Outside the window, Boston continued its Saturday morning without me. The harbor brightening. The neighboring towers empty and still. The particular quality of a city at rest that makes it possible, briefly, to believe that nothing urgent is happening anywhere. Eleanor had given me 2 things that morning. One was 7 months of silence that I would have to find a way to carry alongside everything else. The other was a name attached to a sealed legal matter in a city my wife had never once mentioned, connected to a man who was currently helping her move $475,000 out of a marriage I was still living inside. I needed someone who knew how to find the things that people put serious resources into making invisible. I reached for my phone and looked up a number I had referred clients to for years, but had never once called for myself. The Brennan Shaw and Caldwell reception area smelled like cedar and leather. The particular combination of materials that signals in certain professional environments that the people inside are accustomed to being taken seriously. The firm occupied the 14th floor of a building on Federal Street, 4 floors below my own office, close enough that I had walked past the lobby entrance hundreds of times, without once considering that I might someday be the one sitting in the waiting area under my own name. I had referred clients here over the years. Business partners navigating difficult transitions, executives going through the kind of circumstances that require someone genuinely capable rather than merely credentialed. I had shaken hands in this lobby, made introductions, handed off business cards. I had never once imagined sitting in one of those chairs for myself. The receptionist led me down a carpeted corridor on Monday morning, the 21st of October. The corner office at the end of the hall had windows on 2 sides. Federal Street below, the downtown skyline beyond. Bookshelves covered the interior wall, and a single framed photograph sat on the credenza that I did not look at closely. Vivian Caldwell was standing when I entered. 55 years old, silver threading through dark hair she wore pulled back without ornamentation, a gold watch on her left wrist, and a quality of stillness in her posture that communicated neither warmth nor its absence. Only the particular authority that accumulates in a person who has spent nearly 3 decades managing other people's most difficult moments with professional precision. We shook hands. She gestured to the chair across her desk. Mr. Ashford, tell me what you have. I placed my phone on the desk without preamble and played the screen recording of the spreadsheet. Vivian Caldwell watched the screen for the full duration. She did not write anything. She did not change her expression in any direction I could measure. When the recording ended, she sat back slightly and lifted her pen. Are you filing or reconciling? She asked. Filing, I said. Good. She made a note at the top of the legal pad. The certainty will serve you. I walked her through the remainder. 8 bank transfers totaling approximately $72,000 over 3 months, each structured below the $10,000 Bank Secrecy Act reporting threshold, routed to an account I could not identify. The initials M.C. in the spreadsheet annotations. Eleanor's account of the Whitmore Foundation Gala in March. The name Malcolm Cross. The outline of a sealed legal matter in Seattle, attached to Malcolm's professional history. And a second reference, unconfirmed, to something in Scottsdale, Arizona, connected not to Malcolm but to Diane herself. Vivian listened through all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she reviewed her notes before responding. The email. Massachusetts operates under a one-party consent standard. You received the spreadsheet on your own device, without any improper action on your part. Diane sent it voluntarily, however inadvertently. There is no credible argument that you obtained it unlawfully. She set her pen flat on the desk. In divorce proceedings, this is admissible, and its evidentiary weight is considerable. But its value to you today is more fundamental than any courtroom application. It tells you clearly what you are dealing with. She turned a page on the legal pad. Here is what you are going to do for the next 30 days. You will not confront Diane. You will not transfer any money from your joint accounts. You will not change your daily behavior in any way that signals to her that she has been discovered. You will continue to move through your life as it has appeared. She paused. That is going to be uncomfortable. It is also non-negotiable if we want to be in the strongest possible position when we file. What about the financial records? I asked. I am retaining a forensic accountant who works specifically in marital asset concealment. I have used her on 3 similar cases in the past 4 years. The transfer pattern you have described is textbook deliberate structuring, amounts kept below Bank Secrecy Act thresholds, routed to an unidentified external account, distributed across enough time to avoid pattern flagging. Full forensic analysis will take 14 to 21 days. We will have a complete picture before we file a single document. There was a knock at the door. Courtney Walsh, Vivian's associate, entered with a documentation folder. Late 30s, the kind of focused composure that suggests someone who has made precision into a professional identity. She reviewed with me what records to preserve, how to maintain them without alerting Diane, and what categories of communication to begin archiving. The exchange took 10 minutes. She left quietly. When the room was ours again, I asked the question I had been carrying since Friday evening. What if I am not able to remain in the house? Vivian did not rush her answer. That is a personal decision, Mr. Ashford, not a legal directive from this office. If you choose to leave, notify me before you do. Document the date and your stated reason. Massachusetts equitable distribution does not automatically penalize the spouse who voluntarily vacates. Your ownership interest is not diminished by your physical absence. She looked at me directly. What leaving does carry is a narrative that opposing counsel will attempt to frame. I want you clear on that. Only you know whether 30 more days inside that house is something you can manage. I can give you the parameters. The choice belongs to you. I nodded. She had handed it back to me cleanly. That, I found, was more useful than reassurance would have been. Vivian set her pen across the legal pad with the deliberateness of someone closing a thought. In 28 years of practicing family law, Mr. Ashford, the men who walk into this office and lose control of their own outcomes are, without exception, the ones who act before they have thought. They confront before they hold leverage. You sat with information that would have broken most people's composure for 72 hours before you called this office. She paused. You have already done the harder thing. Now let us make certain that advantage holds. I took the elevator down and stepped onto Federal Street into October air that had gone sharp overnight. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, registering what I was now carrying. A legal strategy, a defined timeline, a forensic accountant beginning Monday, and a woman on the 14th floor who had handled situations like this before and communicated that fact without drama. My phone buzzed. Diane, thinking of driving up to the vineyard this weekend. Just us. What do you say? I typed back without hesitation. Sounds perfect. Looking forward to it. I pocketed the phone and walked toward the parking structure. 28 days remaining. The vineyard. The place where we had exchanged vows 26 years ago, beneath the arbor overlooking Seneca Lake. The place I returned to every weekend, to find whatever quiet my life in Boston could not provide. She had no way of knowing that the place she was suggesting for a weekend away was the same place where, in 28 days, I intended to sit across from her with a leather notebook and a set of facts that would end everything she believed was still proceeding on schedule. The plan existed. The pieces were beginning to move. What I did not yet have, what no amount of preparation could supply until the forensic accountant finished her work, was any clear sense of how deep the structure went, or what it was going to look like when someone finally laid all of it out flat on a conference table. 4 rules. Observe, document, stay present, do not react. I repeated them in the car each morning on the drive from Marlborough Street to Federal Street. I repeated them at night, before I closed my eyes. I built my behavior around them the way you build a structure around a frame, one deliberate choice at a time. Nothing improvised. Nothing left to the unreliable territory of whatever I actually felt. The mornings were the most technically demanding. Diane came downstairs between 6:30 and 6:45, by which point I was already dressed, already on my first coffee, already running through the mental checklist of whatever the day required. I had been making 2 cups every weekday morning for 26 years. Filling hers first. Leaving it on the counter where she always stood to check her phone. That habit had lived so deep in me it had never required thought. Now I made the 2 cups deliberately. Consciously. As a chosen act, rather than an automatic one. And the difference between those 2 things was something I felt in my hands every morning. She would kiss me on the cheek on her way to the counter. I would hand her the coffee. "Have a good day," she would say. "You too," I would answer. 26 years of that exchange. It had always felt like warmth. What it felt like now was a stage direction I had memorized. I went to the office. I attended meetings. I reviewed portfolios. I returned calls. I answered emails with the professional attention that clients, paying substantial fees, had every right to expect. I drove home along routes so familiar they required no decisions from me, which was useful because my decision-making resources were being consumed somewhere else entirely. The weeks produced their own particular texture. I took Diane to dinner on the 23rd at a place she liked in the South End, a French bistro with small tables and candlelight that she had always preferred for weeknight evenings, and I spent 2 hours being a husband who was present. I asked about her week. I listened to her describe a project her department was restructuring. I contributed where contribution was natural. I did not perform more than the occasion required. And I watched her. Not with suspicion, which would have been detectable, with attention. The kind of attention I had spent 32 years applying to financial documents and had never once thought to apply to the person sitting across from me at dinner. She was good at this. Better than I had understood before I had a reason to measure it. The warmth she projected was not manufactured in any way I could identify. The questions she asked were not scripted. She remembered details from conversations I had half forgotten, the name of a contractor who had frustrated me 3 weeks earlier, a concern I had mentioned about a client's estate plan, the specific bottle of wine I had ordered at a restaurant in August that I had said I would look for again. These were not the habits of a person performing care. They were the accumulated observations of a person who had been paying close attention for 26 years. That was the difficulty. The attention was real. The care was real. And the betrayal was equally real, running underneath it like a current beneath still water, invisible from the surface, and absolutely present. I was learning, in the compressed way that difficult circumstances accelerate understanding, that those two realities could occupy the same space simultaneously, without canceling each other out. That coexistence, I thought, not the spreadsheet, not the transfers, not Eleanor's 7 months of silence, was the cruelest part of the whole thing. On a Tuesday morning in the second week, Nathan Hale placed an additional coffee on my desk without being asked and without saying anything. He simply set it there and kept moving. Nathan had been the chief operating officer of Ashford and Partners for 18 years. He was the man who kept the operational machinery of the firm running with a quiet, undemanding competence that I had come to regard as one of the most reliable things in my professional life. He understood the boundary between a problem he could help with and one that belonged to someone else entirely. He never crossed it. The coffee was a small gesture, the kind that registers only because of its precision, the way it arrives without preamble or explanation, the way it says everything it needs to, without requiring a word to be spoken. I sat with that coffee for several minutes before I drank it. It was the closest I came during those weeks to losing the composure I had been maintaining at considerable cost. I thought often during the first 2 weeks about a Thursday evening in late September, 3 weeks before the email arrived. A corporate networking event at the Mandarin Oriental in Back Bay, the kind of function I attended out of professional obligation rather than any preference, the kind of room that was useful to be visible in. Diane had come with me. She was good at these events, better than I was in certain ways. She moved through a room with ease, remembered names, made connections that occasionally turned into something useful. She had stopped beside me about an hour into the evening and said, with the natural ease of a woman making an unremarkable introduction, "Thomas, this is Malcolm Cross, investment colleague." Very sharp. The man who turned from the adjacent conversation was 47, compact, well-dressed. The kind of tailored confidence that comes from knowing exactly what impression you are making. He extended his hand with a direct, unhurried gaze. "Good to meet you, Mr. Ashford. I have heard good things about your firm." We spoke for perhaps 5 minutes about market trends in alternative investments before the conversation dispersed into the general movement of the room. I had not thought about it again until now. I thought about it now in considerable detail. I had stood in that room and shaken the hand of the man who was, at that very moment, helping to systematically dismantle what I had spent 32 years building. Malcolm Cross had looked at me steadily, said the right things, smiled at the appropriate intervals, and given no sign whatsoever that anything was occurring beneath the surface of the exchange. Looking back, I also noticed the distance Diane had maintained from Malcolm for the rest of that evening. Not avoidance. Something more deliberate than that. A calibrated space. Close enough to look coincidental. Managed enough that it never accumulated into something a casual observer might remark on. It seemed practiced, the way two people look when they have worked out exactly how much room to leave between themselves in public. At midnight on that Tuesday, near the end of the second week, I stood at the bathroom sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. The man looking back appeared by every external measure completely fine. I had always been good at that. 23 more days, I said to the mirror, quietly, to no one. It was the first time I had counted what was left instead of what had passed. Something about that shift felt significant, though I could not have explained precisely why. On the evening of the 25th of October, my phone buzzed with a text from Graham Whitaker. Graham was 56 years old and had been Diane's closest friend for more than a decade. A corporate attorney with an office on State Street and the particular social ease of someone who had spent his professional life knowing the right people and ensuring they knew him. I had sat across from him at dinner tables and holiday gatherings for years. We had never been close in the way that required much from either of us. He was Diane's friend. I was the husband who came with the arrangement. The message read, "Hey man, Hope everything is solid with you and Diane. Tell her I called. I read it 3 times before I responded. It was not a friendly check-in. The specific phrasing, hope everything is solid with you and Diane, was the phrasing of someone who already knew something might not be. Solid is not the word you use to describe a marriage you believe is functioning normally. Solid is the word you use when you have reason to suspect the foundation has shifted and you are testing whether the other person has noticed. And the instruction to tell Diane he had called was not the request of a man who could not reach her directly. It was information being relayed to Diane through me, designed to read as casual while carrying a question underneath it. Has he seen it? Does he know? I typed back. Will do. Hope you and Andrea are well. Cheerful. Unbothered. The text of a man with nothing on his mind. I set the phone down and went back to what I had been reading. I had spent 32 years in wealth management. I knew exactly what it looked like when someone tested a position without committing to it. Graham Whitaker had just executed the conversational equivalent of a due diligence inquiry disguised as small talk. The question was not whether he knew something. The question was, how much? That Friday, the 1st of November, Vivian called just after 8 in the morning. I was already at my desk. I had been there since 6:50. The 2 weeks of routine had settled into me in a way I had not fully anticipated. Not exhaustion exactly, but the particular weight of sustained vigilance. The cost of being simultaneously 2 versions of myself and keeping both of them calibrated to the same performance. I was sleeping, but not deeply. I was working, but not freely. Everything I did passed through a second layer of consideration before I allowed it to become action. The call came through on my direct line. I picked up on the first ring. The first layer is in, Vivian said. We have identified an entity. Ashford Cross Capital Partners. Limited Liability Company. South Dakota registration. The operating account is maintained through a Nevada-domiciled holding structure, which is a common arrangement for parties who want to create legal distance between the beneficial owner and the operating funds. She paused with the precision of someone who understood exactly when to let information settle before adding the next piece. The ownership structure is intentionally obscured. The registered agent is a firm that specializes in privacy-protected formations. We know the name and the shell. We do not yet know who controls it. That is what we are working on now. Give us 5 to 7 more days. Ashford Cross, I said. Yes. I let the name sit in the silence between us. Ashford Cross. My surname and Malcolm's, joined together in the name of a limited liability company registered in a state neither of us had any connection to. The combination was not subtle to me now, though I understood it had been designed to be invisible to anyone who was not looking for the specific connection. Someone had thought carefully about that name, the way you think carefully about anything you intend to leave in plain sight, while trusting that no one will examine it closely enough to see what it actually says. In the meantime, Vivian continued, do not change your routine. Do not do anything that might signal movement on your end. Understood. A brief pause on the line. Then, one more thing. In the course of the research, we have encountered a reference to prior professional activity by Malcolm Cross that warrants further investigation. I would rather not speculate on its nature until we have something concrete. What I will say is that the reference suggests this may not be the first time he has operated in this general manner. I let that sit for a moment before responding. How long before you know more? The same window. 5 to 7 days. I will call you when we have something worth discussing. She ended the call with her usual economy. I set the phone down and remained where I was for a while, looking at the city outside my window. Boston Harbor, in the early November light. The waterfront cranes still. A plane lifting off from Logan, banking south over the harbor islands. Ashford Cross Capital Partners. A South Dakota limited liability company with a privacy-protected ownership structure and an operating account maintained through a Nevada holding entity. My name. In the name. My money in the structure. My wife's handwriting in the spreadsheet that had started all of this. I thought about Graham Whitaker's text from earlier that week. Hope everything is solid. I thought about the Mandarin Oriental in September, Malcolm Cross extending his hand with an unhurried gaze, while Diane stood 3 careful feet to his left. I thought about the networking events, the holiday parties, the dinners where people I had trusted sat across from me with varying degrees of knowledge about what was happening beneath the surface of my life and chose, each for their own reasons, to say nothing. I worked through the rest of the morning on the Worthington Trust restructuring, on a call with a client about a real estate allocation that needed rebalancing, on a memo to Nathan about the year-end audit timeline. I answered every question directly and on point. I returned every message. I was, by every professional measure, fully present. At 2:15, my cell phone buzzed. Nathan Hale. "You missed the partner's lunch," Nathan said. Harrison noticed. "Tell him I had a conflict. I will reach him tomorrow morning." A moment of silence. The particular silence Nathan used when he was deciding whether something warranted a follow-up question. "You good, Thomas?" "Fine, Nathan. I am fine." Another of those silences. Then, "All right." He ended the call. I appreciated, not for the first time, the discipline it took for Nathan Hale to consistently ask the question and then accept the answer he was given without pushing. Nathan was extending me a kind of trust. I intended to be worth it. That evening I drove home and found a note on the kitchen counter in Diane's handwriting. "Picked up your favorite from Neptune Oyster. Wine is open." I stood in the kitchen, holding the note. 26 years of small gestures like this. A woman who knew every detail of what I preferred without being reminded, without being asked. The care was real. I had no mechanism left for doubting that. And the entity registered in South Dakota with my name in its name was equally real. 21 days remaining. There are things you see differently once you understand what you are looking for. I had been in the same room with both of them. I had stood close enough to shake one of their hands. And I had perceived nothing. That thought, more than the spreadsheet, more than the bank transfers, more than Eleanor's 7 months of silence, was the one that kept arriving on the nights when maintaining the performance required everything I had. On the afternoon of the 5th of November, a Wednesday in the middle of the 3rd week, I drove to Newberry Street. I was not normally a man who sat in parked cars observing other people's buildings. I was a man who sat in conference rooms, reading portfolios, and making allocation decisions. But after 17 days of managing an abstraction, after 17 days of names on spreadsheets and initials in columns and dollar amounts that existed only as figures on a screen, I needed to see the concrete reality of the person at the center of it. I needed a face to attach to the thing I was carrying. Malcolm Cross operated out of a firm called Pinnacle Advisory on the upper floor of a brownstone conversion on Newberry Street, the kind of address that in Boston's Back Bay communicates a particular version of professional legitimacy. Tasteful. Established. The sort of building a man would choose if he wanted his business to look as though it had always been there. I parked on the 2nd level of a garage on Exeter Street, directly across from the building's entrance, and turned off the engine. I was not there to approach Malcolm Cross. I had no script for that conversation, no legal standing to initiate it, and no strategic interest in anything other than what Vivian had told me to do, which was specifically nothing until she said otherwise. I knew this. I was there because I needed to see him. Not the name. Not the initials. The man. I waited. At 5:32 in the afternoon, Malcolm Cross walked out of the Newberry Street entrance. He was 47, and he looked it in the way that men look 47 when everything has gone more or less according to plan. A compactness to his frame that suggested he still paid attention to how he carried himself. A charcoal overcoat over a suit that fit well. Oxford shoes and a dark tan that caught the streetlight as he moved. He was on his phone, speaking, his stride even and unhurried. A man with somewhere to go, who had never once had to calculate whether he had the right to go there. He crossed the sidewalk to a black Mercedes parked at the curb and got in without looking up. He did not scan the street or the parking structure across from him. He did not have any visible awareness that someone was sitting 60 yards away cataloging his existence with the disciplined attention of a man who had spent 32 years evaluating what people were worth and had never once applied that skill in this particular direction. He drove north on Newbury and turned left on Massachusetts Avenue without hesitation. I picked up my notebook and opened it to the next blank page. November 5th, 5:32 in the afternoon. Black Mercedes, Massachusetts plate, beginning 7RK. Charcoal overcoat. Tan Oxford shoes. Even stride. Did not look around. A man who believes the plan is proceeding on schedule. I closed the notebook and sat in the parking structure for another 11 minutes. The streetlights on Newbury were coming on in the early dark of a November evening. Pedestrians moving along the sidewalk with their collars turned up against the cold. The ordinary texture of a city going about its business without reference to anything that had just passed in front of it. I thought about a holiday party 2 years ago at Diane's company. A December evening at their offices on Boylston Street. The kind of corporate event where spouses attend out of loyalty rather than enthusiasm, where you hold a glass of wine and make conversation with people whose names you will not remember by the time you reach the parking garage. I had been standing near the window talking to one of Diane's colleagues about the commercial real estate market when I noticed a woman across the room. She was in her early 50s. Dark suit. Careful posture. She was not part of any conversation cluster. She stood slightly apart in the way of someone who observes rooms more than she performs for them. What I had noticed, and what I had not understood at the time, was the way she had looked at me. A long, careful, measuring look that had carried something in it I had not been equipped to name. I did not know her name. I had not spoken to her that evening. But the look had stayed with me in the way that certain things stay, not because you understand them, but precisely because you do not. I was beginning to understand it now. It was the look of someone who already knew something and was deciding in real time what she was going to do with it. I drove back to Marlborough Street in the November dark. The house was quiet when I arrived. Diane's car in the driveway, but no lights in the front rooms. I stood in the kitchen for a moment without turning on anything, letting the silence of the house settle around me. The forensic accountant needed 5 more days. Whatever was sitting inside the structure of Ashford Cross Capital Partners had been moving for longer than I had known to look. 5 more days, and I would begin to understand the actual dimensions of what I was standing inside. But before those 5 days passed, before the forensic results arrived and the legal architecture became fully visible, there was someone I needed to see. Not for strategy, not for information, for something older than both of those things. Something that had been waiting for me in a house in Concord since before any of this began. I thought about my father's study. The bookshelves floor to ceiling. The leather chair beside the window, where he read every evening with the patience of a man who understood that most things worth knowing required sitting with them longer than you initially wanted to. I had not been to Concord in 3 weeks. I would go this Sunday. There are conversations that cannot happen over a phone line. This was one of them. There are things a man cannot put into a text message, cannot work through in the middle of a week when other people still need him to appear fully in command of himself, cannot bring to anyone whose perception of him has to remain intact for practical reasons. By the time Sunday arrived, I understood that the full picture now sitting in my possession, the spreadsheet, the transfers, the entity in South Dakota with my name embedded in its name, was more than I could hold adequately on my own. So on Sunday morning, I drove south toward Concord. Diane was in the kitchen when I came downstairs with my jacket. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Driving down to see my father." "Need to check on him." She nodded without particular interest, refilling her coffee. "Tell Howard I said hello." "I will," I said. I got in the car and pulled out of Marlborough Street and did not stop until I reached Route 2 west toward Concord. The drive ran 45 minutes on clear roads. I did not turn on the radio or connect my phone to the car audio. I drove in the kind of deliberate quiet I had been seeking unsuccessfully since the 18th of October. The specific quality of silence available only when you are physically removed from the environment where the problem lives. I watched New England pass outside the windows. The bare trees along Route 2, the last of the autumn color gone now. The land settling into the particular gray-brown palette of early November. The sky was low and overcast, the kind of morning that comes in without announcement and stays all day. I had driven this road 1,000 times since childhood. I knew every turn, every place where the trees opened up to show the fields beyond, every stretch where the road corrected itself after going subtly wrong. My father lived on Lowell Road in a house he had occupied for 43 years. A 2-story colonial with a deep front porch and a back garden that he maintained with a consistency I had always found quietly extraordinary. Howard Ashford was 86 years old. He had taught constitutional law at Harvard for 28 years. He had buried my mother 9 years ago. He had outlived several of his closest friends, and he had never once, in my observation, allowed any of those things to diminish his capacity for the particular calm that comes from having made peace with the terms of existence. When I pulled into the driveway, he was in the back garden. I could see him through the side gate, moving slowly along the rose beds, his hands in canvas gloves, pruning the dead growth of the season, with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, cutting back the canes, clearing what had spent itself so that what came in spring would have room to grow. The garden was his anchor in retirement, the way the lecture hall had been his anchor before it. He looked up when he heard the gate. He looked at my face for about 3 seconds. A specific measuring look I had known since childhood, the one that said the information had been received and processed before a word had been spoken. He pulled off one glove and pointed toward the 2 wooden chairs on the back porch without saying anything. We sat. He set the gloves on the porch railing and looked out at the garden. I told him everything. Not the legal structure, not the forensic accounting, not the strategy Vivian had built across 3 weeks of careful preparation. The truth of it, the shape and weight of what it actually was to know what I now knew. The email, the spreadsheet, the transfers, Diane's name, on an entity I had never been told about. The 14 days of sitting across a dinner table from a woman I was beginning to understand I had never fully known. The particular cost of maintaining a performance while carrying the full knowledge of what was happening beneath it. Howard did not interrupt. He did not look at me while I spoke. He looked at the garden, at the bare rose beds, at the turned soil, at the place where the season's growth had been cut back to the roots. He waited until I had finished completely before he said anything. When your mother got sick, he said, I had every reason in the world to be angry at the diagnosis, at the doctors, at whatever order of things arranges for a woman like that to leave too early. I had every reason, and some nights I felt every one of them. He paused. Every morning I had to choose between being the man I wanted her to remember and the man I actually felt like becoming at 4 in the morning. Those are not always the same man. Most mornings they were not even close. I listened. The garden was quiet. No traffic sound reached this far back. Only the occasional movement of a bird somewhere in the bare oak at the garden's edge. What does Vivian say? He asked. Maintain. Then file. Then maintain. We sat in silence for a while after that. I had grown up in this house. I knew the sound of it better than almost any other place in my life. The way the porch boards settled under weight, the particular quality of quiet that the garden held in November, when everything had been cut back and the soil was resting. Before I left, Howard stood from the chair with the measured, deliberate care of a man who has learned not to rush his own body. He placed one hand on my arm. His grip was still firm. The grip of a man who had spent 28 years holding a lecture hall's attention and 9 years holding himself together after the woman he had loved for 51 years was no longer there to hold. What they are trying to take from you, Thomas, he said, is not what they think they are taking. They think it is the money. He paused. It is not the money. Let go. Do not let them have the rest of it. I drove back north in the November dark with both windows cracked despite the cold. The heat was running, which made no practical sense, and which I did not correct. I needed the air. I needed something real against my face after 3 weeks of living inside a performance that required me to be someone I no longer was. 15 days remaining. I knew what was waiting at the end of those 15 days. The confrontation I had been building toward since an office on Federal Street. The morning I had been preparing for since before I fully understood what I was preparing for. What I did not know yet was that 2 additional things were already moving toward me before that morning arrived. One was coming from inside Diane's professional world, carried by a woman with careful eyes who had looked at me across a holiday party 2 years ago in a way I had not understood at the time. The other was traveling across the Pacific Ocean from a dormitory in Tokyo, carried by a 22-year-old who had been holding a piece of this story in silence for 6 months and had now decided that holding it alone was no longer something he was willing to do. Of all the 30 days, the 22nd was the hardest. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. The 3 days after Concord had passed the way the rest of the performance had passed, in the deliberate motions of a man maintaining a character he had constructed out of necessity. Coffee in the morning. The office. Dinner. The notebook in the drawer beside the stove growing 1 entry at a time. I had not heard from Vivian since the 1st of November, which she had told me to interpret as the absence of news rather than the absence of progress. I had interpreted it accordingly and continued moving through my days. The anniversary fell on a Saturday, the 9th of November. 26 years. Diane had made the reservation at L'Espalier. She mentioned it 3 days before, with the ease of someone who had been thinking about it, who had chosen the restaurant the way she chose most things, with attention to what she knew about the person she was choosing it for. L'Espalier was my kind of restaurant. Quiet enough for actual conversation, exceptional food, the kind of place that took the meal seriously without making the surroundings feel like a performance of wealth. I had been going there for 18 years. She knew that. I dressed that evening in the dark suit she had always said she preferred on me and drove us there through the Back Bay streets in the November dark. Thanksgiving was less than 3 weeks away. The seasonal lights on Commonwealth Avenue were already up, the bare trees strung with white that caught the wet pavement and reflected it back in a way that made the whole block look as though it were holding its breath. Diane was warm throughout the meal in the way that she was sometimes genuinely, disarmingly warm. Interested in what I was thinking, asking the kinds of questions that a person only asks if they have been paying attention for a long time. She asked about a deal I had mentioned in passing 2 weeks earlier. She remembered the name of the contractor I had been frustrated with in October. She remembered a concern I had raised about a client's estate plan that I had half forgotten raising myself. These were not manufactured details. They were the accumulated observations of a person who had been watching me closely for 26 years. That was what made it unbearable. Not that she was pretending, that she was not. "Do you remember what you said on our first anniversary?" she asked during the second course. I thought about it honestly. I said I had never had a year go by that fast. She turned her wine glass slightly on the table. "You said that." And I said I could not imagine what the next 25 would look like. A small pause. "I have been thinking about that lately." "So have I said. I meant it differently than she did. Both of us knew, in our separate ways, that something had already shifted irreversibly. Only one of us knew why. Between the main course and dessert, Diane reached into her bag and set a flat box on the table between us. Dark blue, no larger than a paperback, tied with a single ribbon. She did not make a production of it. She simply placed it there and waited. Inside was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück. Black resin, gold trim, the weight of it substantial and precise in the hand. Engraved on the cap band in small letters. T period, A period, dash, 26. I had pointed to one in a shop window on Newbury Street 2 years ago. We had been walking back from dinner on a Saturday evening, and I had stopped for a moment in front of the display case the way you stop when something catches your eye, without triggering any intention to acquire it. I had admired it for perhaps 10 seconds. I had forgotten it by the time we reached the next block. She had not. Diane placed her hand over mine on the table. 26 years, she said. I would build it all again with you. I looked at her. I looked at her, the way I had been looking at her for weeks. Thoroughly. Without the softening effect of habit, trying to find the seam between what was real and what was constructed. I did not find it. That was the part I had not been able to prepare myself adequately for. There was no visible seam, whatever she felt for me. And something in her did feel something. I was no longer capable of doubting that. It ran alongside everything else, without apparent contradiction. Two things simultaneously true in the same person. I was still developing the vocabulary for that. Thank you, I said. It is beautiful. I held the pen for a moment, feeling its weight. Of course it fit. Of course she had known the exact model. Of course the engraving was precise and understated in the way I would have chosen it myself. 26 years of observation had given her a map of my preferences so detailed that she could navigate it without consulting it. We finished dinner in the way of people who have shared enough meals together that silence is not a problem. She talked about a colleague's upcoming retirement party. I listened, contributed where contribution was natural, and did not perform more than the occasion required. I had learned over these weeks, a better actor than I would have previously credited myself. In the parking area afterward, Diane took my arm the way she had taken it on hundreds of walks across 26 years. The specific, unthinking ease of a gesture that has been made so many times it no longer registers as a choice. I know this year has been hard, she said. The Worthington Trust. All of it. I want you to know that I see that. I know you do, I said. We drove home in a comfortable quiet. The Mont Blanc sat in my jacket pocket through the drive, through the evening, through the hour I sat at my desk after Diane had gone upstairs. I opened the notebook to the next blank page. November 9th. L'Espalier. Mont Blanc Meisterstück. TA-26. She said, 26 years. I would build it all again with you. Documented. I set the pen down and sat for a while looking at what I had written. There was something I needed to name, even if only to myself. It was not hatred. It was not any longer simple grief. It was the recognition that I was mourning something that had not fully been what I had believed it was, which is a different and more complicated kind of loss than mourning something real. You do not dismantle 26 years in 22 days, even when you know everything you now know. The math does not work that way. Grief and anger, I was learning, are not always distinct emotions. Sometimes the cruelest element of a betrayal is that the person who has betrayed you still carries the genuine habits of caring about you. That is not weakness on your part. That is 26 years of actual life shared between two actual people. Whatever else was also true at the same time. I carried the Mont Blanc upstairs and set it on the nightstand. I looked at it for a moment before turning off the lamp. I did not take it with me when I left. 8 days remaining. Vivian called on a Monday morning with the quality of controlled urgency that I had learned to read in the 3 weeks we had been working together. Not alarmed. Vivian Caldwell did not appear to traffic in alarm, but a particular compression in her voice that said the information had arrived and was waiting to be delivered. Come in at 10, she said. Courtney has the full picture. I was in the conference room on Federal Street by 9:58. Courtney Walsh was already there. A structured arrangement of documents spread across one end of the long table. Printed pages. Flagged sections. A legal pad with organized notes running down its left margin, in handwriting precise enough to have been typeset. Vivian came in at 10 exactly and took the chair at the head of the table without ceremony. Walk him through it, she said to Courtney. Courtney Walsh had the manner of someone who understood that clarity was a form of respect, and she delivered the findings accordingly. Ashford Cross Capital Partners, Limited Liability Company, she began. Registered in South Dakota on August 19th of last year. 20 months ago. The operating account is maintained through a Nevada-domiciled holding entity, which is a common structure for parties who want to create legal distance between the beneficial owner and the operating funds. We have now identified both. She turned a page. The beneficial owner of Ashford Cross Capital Partners, The individual who controls and benefits from the entity is Malcolm Cross. The signatory authority on the operating account, the person authorized to approve and execute fund transfers, is Diane Ashford. I kept my hands flat on the table. I said nothing. Courtney continued. Over the 20 months since the limited liability company was established, 42 transfers have been made from your joint marital accounts into the Ashford Cross operating account. Each transfer falls between $8,000 and $9,500. She looked up briefly. Those amounts are not accidental. The Bank Secrecy Act requires financial institutions to file a currency transaction report for any cash transaction exceeding $10,000. The transfers were structured to remain below that threshold. She set the page down. Additionally, the amounts and timing were varied. No two transfers were identical in size, and the intervals between them ranged from 8 days to 24 days. This is consistent with an attempt to avoid triggering the anti-money laundering behavioral pattern flagging systems that most major banks operate. The room was quiet. The total transferred to date is $475,000. I looked at the number on the page in front of me. $475,000. I thought about the notebook in the drawer beside the stove at Marlborough Street. Every entry written by hand in the tradition my father had taught me. I thought about Howard in his garden in Concord, pruning dead canes so the living wood could grow. I thought about 42 transfers in 20 months and the specific calculation required to keep all of it below the surface of a life that looked, from every visible angle, entirely intact. This was not an impulsive decision, Vivian said. The limited liability company was incorporated 20 months ago. The transfer pattern was established and maintained consistently across that entire period. At no point did the activity deviate from the established structure in a way that would suggest improvisation. What you are looking at is a planned exit that has been executing steadily while you were still inside the marriage. I did not allow the full weight of it to arrive all at once. I had learned in the weeks since October 18th that this was a discipline, parceling what you could process in real time and holding the rest at a manageable distance until you had the capacity to receive it. Is there anything in this material that connects Malcolm Cross to situations of this kind before Boston? I asked. Vivian held my gaze. We found references that require further investigation before I am willing to characterize them to you. I do not speculate ahead of evidence. It does not serve you, and it does not serve the case. She paused. What I will say is that the references exist, and that we are pursuing them with the same thoroughness we applied to the limited liability company. She closed the folder in front of her. You will have a full picture when we have a full picture. I nodded. That was, I understood, the correct answer. Not a reassurance. Not a deflection. A professional commitment to the standard she had told me from the beginning she intended to maintain. Courtney Walsh collected the documents back into their folder with the same quiet precision she had brought to spreading them out. Vivian walked me to the elevator herself, an unusual gesture that I noticed, and said nothing before the doors opened. 6 days remaining, she said. Do not change anything. I drove north from Federal Street through late morning traffic. Not toward the office. Not toward Marlborough Street. I was not sure entirely why. I had turned in a direction that was neither of those. I found myself on Commonwealth Avenue heading west without having consciously decided to go there. The bare trees overhead. The seasonal lights still strung in the branches from the week before. The whole avenue looking the way November in Boston always looks when the color has gone and the architecture is all that remains. I pulled to the curb near the intersection with Dartmouth Street and turned off the engine. The brownstones along Commonwealth sat in their rows the way they had sat for 150 years. Quiet. Ordered. Built to last. I had spent 32 years in a city full of structures, designed by people who understood that what you build is only as sound as the foundation you put beneath it. $475,000. 42 transfers. 20 months. While I was signing the mortgage renewal that kept our son's education fund intact. While I was wiring the tuition payments that had put Ryan in a lecture hall at Wharton while I was sitting at the kitchen table eating the meals she prepared and believing, with the complete and uncomplicated trust of a man who had no reason to look closer, that I was building something that would hold. Before I reveal what happened the morning Thomas finally sat Diane down at the vineyard with the truth. Drop the word ready in the comments right now. Just let me know you are still here with me. Quick note. The story ahead contains some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. If this is not the kind of content you are looking for, you are welcome to step away. No hard feelings. 6 days remaining. On the morning of November 17th, I was up before 5:30. Not because I could not sleep, because I was done waiting. I had slept, actually, more deeply than I had slept in weeks. The way you sleep when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you know that tomorrow you are finally going to set it down. There is a particular quality to that kind of rest. Not peaceful exactly. Resigned might be closer. The body understanding before the mind does that the holding is almost over and allowing itself, for the first time in a month, to fully let go. I lay still for a few minutes in the dark, listening to Diane's breathing beside me. The slow, even rhythm I had witnessed her fall into thousands of times across 26 years. The sound of a person at rest who has no reason to believe the morning will be different from any other morning. I did not look at her. I did not need to. I had been looking at her for 30 days with a quality of attention I had never applied before, and what I had seen was more than enough. I rose quietly. I dressed without turning on any light, moving between the closet and the bathroom in the dark, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had decided exactly what he was going to wear and exactly how this morning was going to proceed. A dark navy dress shirt, no tie, charcoal trousers, not a suit. This was not a meeting, but it was not a Saturday either, in any sense that the word usually carried. We had driven up to the vineyard the evening before. Diane had suggested it earlier in the week, the way she often did when the weather turned and the city felt too compressed. A weekend at the vineyard. Just us. The leaves were gone from the vines now. The harvest was long finished. The winery across the road had closed for the season, but the cottage was still warm. And Seneca Lake in November had a particular quality of stillness that I had loved since the first autumn I spent there, 24 years ago. It was the place where we had exchanged vows. A Saturday afternoon in September, 26 years ago, beneath the arbor at the north end of the property with Seneca Lake behind us, and 30 people in folding chairs, and Howard reading the passage from Ecclesiastes that he had chosen without being asked because he understood what the Relifes's occasion required better than either of us did. I had not chosen this place for the confrontation. Diane had chosen it. She had suggested the weekend. She had packed the car. She had driven the 5 hours from Boston while I sat in the passenger seat and answered her questions about work and about Ryan and about whether we should replace the kitchen counters in the cottage before spring. She had delivered us both to the exact location where everything was going to end, without any awareness that she was doing so. There is a word for that kind of irony, but I have not found it. I went downstairs and stood in the kitchen for a moment before I did anything else. 26 years of mornings in this room. The same window looking out over the vineyard rows toward the lake. The same light fixture above the table that we had chosen together during the renovation the second year. The same arrangement of the counter space that we had arrived at sometime in the first autumn and never changed. The coffee maker in the corner, the ceramic canisters she had bought in the Finger Lakes the weekend after we closed on the property, the cutting board her mother had given us as a wedding gift, still in use, still positioned to the left of the sink where Diane always placed it. I looked at all of it with the deliberate attention of someone memorizing a place they understand they are leaving. Then I made 2 cups of coffee. I made 2 because I had made 2 every morning for 26 years, and because making only 1 would have been its own kind of signal. A small, preemptive announcement of what was coming before I was ready to announce it myself. I placed hers on the counter where she always stood. I placed mine at the head of the table where I always sat. I opened the leather notebook and set it to my right. Every entry since October 18th was there, written in the handwriting my father had taught me to trust more than any digital record. Dated. Documented. The full chronology of what I had discovered and when I had discovered it, laid out in the order it had arrived. I opened my laptop at the center of the table and navigated to the spreadsheet. The original file. 47 columns. 20 months. $475,000. I set the display to the first row and left it there. I opened the audio recording application on my phone and confirmed the function was running. Massachusetts operates under a one-party consent statute. The only consent required to record a conversation is the consent of one participant. I was a participant. I had consented. I sat down at the head of the table with the coffee and the notebook and the laptop and the phone recording quietly beside the sugar bowl, and I waited. At 7:52 in the morning, my phone screen lit with a text from Vivian Caldwell. Everything is ready on our end. Monday, 9 in the morning. You have what you need. I typed back. Thank you. I set the phone down and looked at what was in front of me. The notebook. The laptop. The 2 cups of coffee. The kitchen was entirely quiet. Outside the window, the vineyard rose, stretched toward Seneca Lake in the gray light of a November morning. The vines bare, the posts standing in their lines like the framework of something that has been stripped down to its structure. No leaves. No fruit. Just the bones of what the season had been, waiting for what the next season might become. I had lived with this vineyard for 24 years. I had watched it through every season. I knew what it looked like when everything was growing, and I knew what it looked like when everything had been cut back. This morning it looked like the second thing. At 8:22, I heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Diane's footsteps on the cottage stairs. The specific rhythm of her particular pace. The way the third step gave slightly under her weight. A creak I had heard 10,000 times and never once thought to count. The small pause at the bottom where she always stopped to adjust to whatever the day was going to be. I had never cataloged any of it before. I was cataloging it now because it was the last morning it would sound the way it had always sounded. She was coming down the stairs into a kitchen that looked the same as it had looked every Saturday and Sunday morning for 24 years. 2 cups of coffee. Her husband at the table. The vineyard outside the window. Everything in its usual place. Except for the notebook she had never seen. And the spreadsheet she had never meant to send. Diane sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around the mug. Steam curled between us. She looked at the window, then at me, and smiled the way she always did on vineyard mornings, unhurried, almost tender. For 26 years, that smile had been the first thing I trusted each day. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep. The air out here does that. Too quiet. She sipped. I was thinking we could walk the eastern ridge before we drive back. The maples should still have color. I nodded. My leather notebook sat closed beside my left hand. The laptop was shut, screen dark, but the file was still open beneath the lid. 47 columns, 20 months, $475,000. Everything Vivian had confirmed. Everything Eleanor had warned me about. Everything Howard told me not to let them take. Diane, I said. She looked up. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not alarm, not yet. Curiosity, maybe. The way a portfolio manager notices an unexpected variance before deciding whether it matters. I need to talk to you about something. She set the mug down. Okay. I opened the notebook. Not the laptop, the notebook. I wanted her to see my handwriting first. The dates, the amounts, the routing numbers I had copied by hand over the past 29 days. I turned it so the pages faced her and placed it flat on the table between us. October 18th, I said. 4:47 p.m. You sent me an email with a spreadsheet attachment. I don't think you meant to. The kitchen didn't change. The light was the same. The coffee was the same. But I watched Diane's posture shift by exactly 1 degree, shoulders drawing inward, fingers tightening around the handle of the mug she had already set down. It was the smallest movement I had ever seen her make, and it told me everything her words had not. Thomas, please let me finish. She closed her mouth. 47 columns, 20 months of wire transfers, each one between $8,100 and $9,400, all structured below the $10,000 Bank Secrecy Act reporting threshold. 42 individual transactions routed through Ashford Cross Capital Partners, a South Dakota LLC with a Nevada operating account. The beneficial owner listed is Malcolm Cross. The authorized signatory is you. I turned to the next page. Total transferred to date: $475,000. Projected exit: March 15th. Status column, on the final row. And I'm quoting directly, undetected. Diane did not move. She did not blink. She sat perfectly still, the way I imagined she had sat through every dinner, every weekend, every anniversary for the past 20 months while this architecture grew beneath us. I had managed money for 32 years. I had built portfolios, structured trusts, guided families through generational transitions, and I had never once noticed that the most sophisticated financial operation in my life was happening inside my own marriage. The forensic accountant completed her analysis 11 days ago. I continued. Vivian Caldwell has reviewed every transaction. Eleanor retained a private investigator in late October who confirmed Malcolm Cross's involvement, including his departure from a previous advisory firm in Seattle, under circumstances that are, at minimum, professionally disqualifying. I closed the notebook. I'm not going to ask you why. I'm not going to ask you how long you've known him, or what you plan to do after March. Those questions don't change the numbers. And the numbers are what matter now. Diane's eyes moved from the notebook to me. For the first time in 29 days, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt. I had expected guilt, and never found it. Not anger. She was too controlled for anger. What I saw was recognition. The look of someone who understands that the position has been reversed, and that the reversal is permanent. You should have paid more attention, she said. The sentence landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. I felt it in my chest, not as pain, but as confirmation. 26 years. 208 quarterly statements. One son. One vineyard. One life I had believed was shared. And her response to all of it was not remorse, not explanation, not even denial. It was critique. You should have paid more attention. I stood. The chair made no sound on the wooden floor. I picked up the notebook, closed the laptop, and placed both in the leather bag I had set by the door before dawn. The bag already held my passport, 2 changes of clothes, the encrypted backup drive, and the filing documents Vivian would submit at 9 o'clock Monday morning at Suffolk County Probate and Family Court. The petition will be filed tomorrow, I said. Vivian will contact your attorney, or you can retain one today. I'd recommend doing it today. Diane remained seated. She did not stand. She did not reach for me. She watched me the way I had watched her for 29 days. Carefully, analytically, measuring what had changed and what could still be controlled. The vineyard, she said quietly. You planned this here. No. I planned it the night you sent me the spreadsheet. The location was yours. I picked up the bag. The strap settled on my shoulder with a weight that felt, for the first time in a month, appropriate. I walked to the front door and opened it. The November air came in cold, sharp, carrying the mineral scent of the lake and the dry sweetness of dormant vines. The sun was above the eastern ridge now, full and clear, lighting the rows I had walked every autumn for 22 years. I did not look back. Not because I was angry, and not because I didn't want to. I didn't look back, because the man who would have looked back was the man who hadn't noticed 47 columns and 20 months of transfers. That man had been sitting at this table for 26 years, trusting what he saw. The man leaving this cottage trusted what he had verified. I got in the car, started the engine, pulled onto the gravel road that led south toward Route 414 and, Eventually, Boston. 15 days ago, Howard had told me, "What they're trying to take from you isn't the money. Don't let them have the rest of it." I kept my hands steady on the wheel and drove. The call came on Tuesday morning, November 19th, at 8:14 a.m. I was sitting in my office on the 19th floor, coffee untouched, reviewing the filing confirmation Vivian had sent 40 minutes earlier. Suffolk County Probate and Family Court had accepted the petition at 9:02 a.m. Monday. Case number 24D1 1847. The document was 12 pages long, referenced 42 structured transactions, 1 South Dakota LLC, and 20 months of concealed financial activity. Diane had been served at the Marlborough Street residence at 11:15 a.m. by a licensed process server. She had opened the door, accepted the envelope, and closed the door without a word. Courtney Walsh confirmed the details by noon. So when my phone lit up with a 617 number I didn't recognize, I nearly let it go to voicemail. I had spent 30 days controlling every interaction, measuring every response, and I was not interested in unscheduled conversations. But something instinct, fatigue, perhaps the particular stillness of the office at that hour made me answer. "Thomas, this is Patricia Hargrove." I set the coffee down. Patricia Hargrove, Diane's mother. 79 years old. Retired professor of comparative literature at Wellesley College. A woman I had known for 26 years and spoken to, on average, once every 5 or 6 weeks. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional Sunday call that Diane would hand to me midway through. Patricia was precise, formal, and deliberate in her speech. She did not make unscheduled phone calls. "Patricia," I said. "Good morning. I understand that you've filed." "Yes." "Yesterday morning." A pause. Not hesitation composition. I had seen this quality in her daughter, and I had always assumed Diane had inherited it from her father, Gerald, who had spent 40 years in corporate insurance. I was wrong. The architecture came from Patricia. "I need to see you," she said. "Today, if possible. There's something you should know before this goes further." I looked at the filing confirmation on my screen. 12 pages, 42 transactions, $475,000. I had spent 30 days building a case I believed was complete. Every column accounted for, every transfer traced, every entity identified. And now Diane's mother, a woman who had never once involved herself in our financial affairs, was telling me there was something more. "Where?" I said. "The Four Seasons." The lobby lounge. 1 o'clock. She was already seated when I arrived. Corner table, facing the entrance. A positioning choice that told me she had thought about this meeting before she made the call. She wore a charcoal cardigan over a white blouse. Pearl earrings. No rings. A cup of tea sat in front of her, untouched. She did not stand when I approached. She gestured to the chair across from her, the way Howard had gestured to the porch chair in Concord, with the economy of someone who had already decided what needed to happen. "Sit down, Thomas." I sat. "I'm not here to defend my daughter," she said. "I want that to be clear before I say anything else." "All right. What Diane did to you is indefensible. The transfers, the entity, Malcolm Cross, all of it. I have not spoken to her since yesterday, and I do not intend to speak to her until this is resolved. That is not why I called." She lifted the tea, sipped once, and set it down with a steadiness that reminded me, painfully, of the way Diane handled a wine glass. In 1994, Diane was living in Scottsdale, Arizona. She was 28. She was married to a man named Robert Ferris. They were married for 14 months. The lobby sounds silverware, low voices. The soft percussion of footsteps on marble continued without interruption. But inside my chest, something shifted. Not surprise. Something deeper. The sensation of discovering that a foundation you had examined and certified was built on soil you had never tested. I didn't know Diane was previously married, I said. No one did. That was the point. Patricia folded her hands on the table. Her fingers were thin, the knuckles slightly swollen age, or tension, or both. Robert Ferris was a real estate developer. Small firm, residential projects. During their 14 months together, Diane opened a joint investment account in both their names and transferred approximately $310,000 from his business operating account into a brokerage she controlled. The transfers were structured to avoid detection, small amounts, irregular timing, routed through an intermediary account at a credit union in Tempe. When Robert discovered the activity, he confronted her. She filed for divorce the following day and relocated to Boston within the week. I said nothing. I was calculating. Not the numbers, the pattern. Scottsdale, 1,994, $310,000. Structured transfers, an intermediary account, a confrontation followed by immediate departure, and then Boston, where she met me 3 years later at a fundraiser for the Museum of Fine Arts, where she told me she had never been married, where I believed her for 26 years. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Patricia looked at me directly. Her eyes were gray, the same gray as Diane's, but without the warmth I had once attributed to her daughter. What I saw instead was clarity, the unflinching clarity of a woman who had watched a pattern repeat and chosen, this time, not to remain silent. Because in Scottsdale, no one warned Robert Ferris. He had no forensic accountant, no attorney, no sister with judicial experience. He lost everything: the business account, the brokerage, the house. The divorce was finalized in 60 days, and Diane walked away with the majority of the assets. Robert closed his firm 18 months later. She paused. I said nothing then because I convinced myself it was an isolated event. A young woman's mistake. A marriage that should not have happened. She turned the teacup 1/4 rotation. But the spreadsheet you found 47 columns, Thomas. That is not a mistake. That is a method. The word settled between us like the final entry in a ledger. Method. 310,000 in Scottsdale. 475,000 in Boston. Different cities. Different decades. Different men. The same architecture. The same exit strategy. The same silence from the people who knew. Thank you, Patricia, I said. She nodded once. I should have called you 26 years ago. I picked up my coat and stood. The lobby was unchanged. Warm light. Polished surfaces. The quiet choreography of a Tuesday afternoon. But the case I had filed yesterday was no longer the case I thought it was. It was larger. It was older. And somewhere in the space between Scottsdale and Boston, there were questions I had not yet learned to ask. Outside, Federal Street was gray and cold. I walked north toward the office, hands in my pockets, and thought about Robert Ferris, a man I had never met, whose name I had never heard, who had lost everything to the same woman 30 years before me. I wondered if he had also made 2 cups of coffee every morning. I wondered if he had also believed he was the one managing the money. Vivian needed to know about this by tonight. Eleanor would want the Scottsdale records pulled by Wednesday. And somewhere in Tokyo, Ryan was holding a piece of this story I still hadn't heard. 15 days had become 0. The filing was done. But the case, the real case, was still unfolding. Graham Whitaker called on Wednesday evening, November 20th, at 6:38 p.m. I was in the study at the Marlborough Street residence, though calling it a residence felt inaccurate now. It was a staging area. Diane had moved to her mother's apartment in Cambridge the morning after being served, taking 2 suitcases and the Volvo. She left no note. The house was exactly as it had been for 26 years, minus 1 person and 1 car. The silence was not empty. It was architectural, the kind of silence that exists inside a structure after the load-bearing element has been removed and the walls are still deciding whether to hold. Thomas, Graham said, I owe you a conversation. I leaned back in the chair. Graham Whitaker, 53, corporate attorney at Whitaker, Engel, and Pratt. Diane's friend for 11 years, introduced at a Harvard Club reception in 2013. He had sent me that probing text on October 29th. Hope everything is solid with you and Diane. Tell her I called. At the time, I had read it as surveillance, a perimeter check disguised as courtesy. I had noted it, filed it, and continued the performance. I'm listening, I said. I knew about Malcolm. Not the transfers, not the entity, not the amounts. But I knew they were involved. Diane told me in July. She framed it as a professional collaboration, an investment venture she was exploring independently. She asked me to review a draft operating agreement for a South Dakota LLC, and I did. I didn't ask enough questions. He paused. I could hear the faint hum of a car engine. He was driving. When I texted you in October, I had started to suspect the scope was larger than what she'd described. The operating agreement I reviewed listed Malcolm Cross as managing member and Diane as authorized signatory. There was no mention of you. For an investment vehicle involving marital assets, that omission was at minimum a red flag I should have acted on. Why didn't you? I asked. The engine hum continued for 3 seconds before he answered. Because I told myself it wasn't my marriage. Because Diane was my friend, and I extended her the professional courtesy of not investigating a client's stated purpose. And because I was wrong. I picked up my pen. The leather notebook was open on the desk, the same notebook I had placed between Diane and me at the Vineyard kitchen table 3 days earlier. I wrote, Graham Whitaker, 11-20, 6 PM, confirms knowledge of Malcolm involvement. July. Reviewed SD LLC operating agreement. Did not disclose to Thomas. Offers cooperation. What are you prepared to do? I said. Whatever Vivian Caldwell needs. Deposition. Written statement. Document. Production. I'll waive privilege on the operating agreement review. It was never a properly formed attorney-client engagement anyway. Diane asked me as a friend, not as counsel of record. I'll have Vivian contact you tomorrow. Thomas. His voice dropped half a register. I should have called you in July. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to let me correct the record. I closed the notebook. The record is what it is, Graham. But your cooperation will matter. He hung up. I sat in the study for a long time after that. Looking at the bookshelves Diane and I had built together the summer we moved in 1999. A Saturday in August. Sawdust on the hardwood floor. A bottle of Sancerre open on the windowsill. She had measured twice and cut once. I had held the levels. The shelves were still perfectly straight, 25 years later. The marriage they contained was not. The call from Tokyo came on Thursday, November 21st. At 7:11 a.m. Eastern, 9:11 p.m. in Japan. I was making coffee. 1 cup. The second cup had become unnecessary 3 days ago. And the absence of that ritual was, in its own way, the most precise measure of what had changed. Dad. Ryan's voice was careful. Not distant careful. The way someone speaks when they have been holding information for a long time and have finally decided to release it. I need to tell you something about Mom's accounts. I set the kettle down. Ryan Ashford. 22. Wharton undergraduate. Currently completing a 1-year fellowship at Nomura Securities in Tokyo. He had been there since August. We spoke every Sunday, a 20-minute call, always initiated by him, always structured the same way. His week, my week, the vineyard, the Red Sox. He had not mentioned his mother's finances in any of those calls. Until now. Go ahead, I said. In June, before I left for Tokyo, Mom asked me to sign a transfer authorization on my education trust. She said it was a reallocation, moving funds from the trust's fixed income position into a blended equity portfolio she described as the Meridian account. The amount was $52,000. 52,000. I wrote the number on the notepad by the coffee maker. The pen pressed harder than I intended. She had the paperwork ready, Ryan continued. Pre-filled. The receiving account was listed as Meridian Capital Reserve, with a routing number I didn't recognize. I signed it because she told me you had approved the reallocation. She said it was part of a larger portfolio restructuring you were both managing. I never approved that transfer, I said. I've never heard of Meridian Capital Reserve. Silence. 6,000 miles of it. I know, Ryan said. I figured that out about 3 weeks ago when I ran the routing number through Nomura's compliance database as part of a training exercise. The account is linked to a Nevada holding entity. The beneficial ownership trace leads to a South Dakota LLC, Ashford Cross Capital Partners. The same structure, the same geography, a different entry point. Ryan, I need you to send me the transfer authorization you signed. The original document, scanned at high resolution, and the routing number. I already have it. I've been carrying it in my laptop bag since October. My son had been sitting in a Tokyo office tower for 6 weeks, holding a document that connected his education trust to the same entity his mother had used to move $475,000 out of our marriage. He had waited not out of complicity, but out of the same paralysis I had felt at 4:47 p.m. on October 18th, when a spreadsheet appeared in my inbox, and the numbers refused to lie. Send it tonight, I said. Encrypted. Vivian's secure portal. I'll text you the link. Dad. A pause. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. You called when you were ready. That's what matters. I hung up and stood in the kitchen. The morning light came through the east window, the way it always had. Soft, gradual, indifferent to what it illuminated. The coffee was ready. 1 cup. The notepad read, Meridian Capital Reserve, $50. 2. K. Ryan's Trust. June. Same structure. The case had grown again. Scottsdale. Boston. And now, Tokyo, where a 22-year-old had carried proof in his laptop bag for 6 weeks, waiting for the moment when silence became more dangerous than speech. I picked up the phone and called Vivian. Ryan's scanned document arrived at 11:47 p.m. Eastern, 1:47 p.m. Friday in Tokyo. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop open, the secure portal loaded, and a glass of water I hadn't touched. The file was 43 megabytes. High resolution. As requested. He had scanned every page front and back, including the margins where Diane had paperclipped a handwritten note that read, Sign both pages. Dad already approved. Love, Mom. I read that note 4 times. Dad already approved. 3 words that turned my son into an instrument. Not a conspirator. A mechanism. Diane had used Ryan's trust in me to access Ryan's trust fund, and the precision of that calculation was, in its own way, more disturbing than the spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is abstract. Columns and numbers and routing codes. But a handwritten note on a transfer authorization. A note that invokes a father's name to manipulate a son's signature that is personal. That is designed to leave no room for hesitation. I forwarded the document to Vivian's portal and opened a new entry in the leather notebook. 11/21, 11:47 p.m. Received scanned transfer auth from Ryan. $52K. Education Trust. Meridian Capital Reserve. Diane's handwritten note references my approval. False. Forwarded to VC. Secure portal. Then I called Ryan back. It was 2:16 p.m. in Tokyo. He answered on the first ring. Did you get it? He said. I got it. Ryan, I need to walk through this with you carefully. Not as your father, as someone who needs to understand exactly how this happened. Okay, start with June. The exact day, if you remember. He did remember. June 14th. A Friday. He was 3 weeks from his departure to Tokyo. packing the Beacon Hill apartment. Diane and I had leased for his senior year. Diane had come over at noon with lunch lobster rolls from Neptune Oyster, the same restaurant she had mentioned in the handwritten note she'd left on the kitchen counter weeks ago, when the performance was still running and I was still pretending not to know. She said you were restructuring the family portfolio before I left. Ryan continued, moving some of the fixed income allocation into a blended equity position that would perform better over a 12 to 18-month horizon. She called it the Meridian account. She said you'd set it up together. I didn't. I know that now. But in June, Dad, she had the paperwork in a Ashford and Partners folder, the branded folder. Navy blue, gold lettering. She had a printed summary showing the projected returns. The summary had your firm's letterhead. I stopped writing. The pen rested on the page. Mid-stroke. My firm's letterhead. I repeated, yes. A one-page performance projection. Meridian Capital Reserve Blended Equity Reallocation. Your logo in the upper left. The compliance disclaimer at the bottom. It looked exactly like the quarterly reports you used to show me when I was learning about portfolio management in high school. She had forged my firm's documents. Not just a handwritten note, a branded performance projection with letterhead and compliance language, designed to make a 22-year-old believe his father had authorized the transfer. I sat back in the chair and felt something shift in the architecture of the case. This was no longer a matter of structured transfers and hidden entities. This was fabrication. Document fabrication using my firm's identity. Ryan, do you still have the printed summary? No. She took it back after I signed. She said it was for the firm's records. Of course she did, but I took a photo of it, he said. I photograph every financial document I sign. You taught me that. I closed my eyes. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I was not a man building a legal case. I was a father hearing his own lesson returned to him through 6,000 miles of encrypted signal, spoken by a son who had listened more carefully than I ever knew. Send it, I said. Same portal. Already uploading. The photo arrived 6 minutes later. It was slightly angled, taken on a phone, probably on the kitchen counter of the Beacon Hill apartment. But every detail was legible. The Ashford and Partners logo, the compliance disclaimer, the projected returns. 8.2% annualized over 18 months. The account name, Meridian Capital Reserve. The allocation, $2,000 from the Ryan T. Ashford Education Trust. And at the bottom, a signature line pre-printed with my name, Thomas R. Ashford, managing partner, left unsigned but positioned to imply authorization. Diane had built a document that looked like it came from my desk. She had carried it to our son in a branded folder. She had watched him sign it over lobster rolls on a Friday afternoon in June. And then she had taken the original back, leaving no paper trail except a 22-year-old's phone camera and a lesson about documenting everything. I saved the photo, backed it up to the encrypted drive, entered the details in the notebook. Forged Ashford and Partners performance projection. Meridian Capital Reserve. $50. $2K. Pre-printed signature line T.R. Ashford unsigned. Ryan photographed 6/14. Original removed by Diane. Ryan, I said. This changes the scope of the case. What your mother did with this document may constitute fraud beyond the divorce proceeding. Vivian will need to assess whether a referral to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office is appropriate. I understand. Are you all right? A pause. Not the calculating silence of Graham Whitaker or the composed stillness of Patricia Hargrove. This was the pause of a 22-year-old realizing that the woman who brought him lobster rolls and handed him a pen had been, in that moment, converting his trust, both kinds, into currency. I'm angry, he said quietly. And I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I signed it. You signed it because your mother told you your father had approved it. That's not a failure of judgment, Ryan. That's a betrayal of trust by someone who was supposed to protect yours. The line was quiet for a long time. I listened to the distance, the soft static of a connection spanning the Pacific, carrying the sound of my son breathing in an office tower in Roppongi while I sat in a kitchen in Boston where the second coffee cup was no longer on the counter. "I'll be available for whatever Vivian needs," Ryan said. "Deposition, testimony, whatever." "Thank you." "Dad?" "Yes. When this is over, I want to come to the vineyard." "The vineyard will be there," I said. "So will I." Ruth Nakamura arrived at Vivian's office on Monday, November 25th, at 10:00 a.m. I had never spoken to her before that morning, but I had seen her once 2 years earlier, at the holiday party Diane's firm hosted at the Langham Hotel. She had been standing near the bar in a navy blazer, holding a glass of sparkling water, and she had looked at me with an expression I could not read at the time. Not pity, not sympathy, something closer to appraisal. The look of someone measuring how much weight a person could bear before they needed to be told the truth. Now I understood what she had been calculating. Ruth Nakamura, 51, Chief Compliance Officer at Hargrove Cross Financial Advisory, the boutique firm Malcolm Cross had co-founded with Diane's college friend, Pamela Hargrove, in 2016. No relation to Patricia Hargrove, Diane's mother, despite the surname. A coincidence that had, Ruth later told me, provided Diane with a layer of social camouflage she exploited deliberately. Ruth had spent 23 years in financial compliance, 7 at Fidelity, 4 at State Street, and the last 12 at Hargrove Cross, where she had overseen every transaction that passed through the firm's accounts. She sat across from me at the conference table on the 14th floor of Brennan Shaw and Caldwell. Vivian was to my left. Courtney Walsh was at the far end, legal pad open, recording. Ruth placed 3 manila folders on the table, evenly spaced, each one labeled with a city name written in black ink. Seattle, Raleigh, Boston. "I want to begin with a disclosure," Ruth said. Her voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of someone who had rehearsed. Not the words, but the order. "I am here voluntarily. I have retained independent counsel who has advised me that cooperation in this matter is both legally appropriate and personally necessary. I am not seeking immunity, compensation, or favorable treatment. I am here because the pattern I identified within Hargrove Cross's transaction records constitutes, in my professional opinion, a systematic misuse of client trust structures, and I have a regulatory obligation to report it." Vivian nodded. "Understood. Please proceed." Ruth opened the first folder. Seattle. Malcolm Cross operated an advisory practice in Seattle from 2009 to 2015 under the name Pinnacle Wealth Strategies. During that period, he managed assets for approximately 40 high-net-worth clients. In 2013, a client named David Langford, retired Boeing executive, 64 years old at the time, filed a complaint with the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions alleging unauthorized transfers from his retirement account. The transfers totaled approximately $380,000 over 19 months. She turned a page. A printed spreadsheet, not 47 columns, but the structure was familiar. Dates on the left, amounts in the center, each one below a threshold. A destination account at the far right. The transfers were structured to remain below regulatory detection thresholds. The receiving account was a Wyoming LLC, owned by a woman listed as Mr. Langford's financial planning associate. That woman's name was Diane Ashford, though at the time, she was using her maiden name, Diane Hargrove. I did not move. The room did not move. Vivian's pen paused over her notepad for exactly 1 beat, then resumed. Ruth opened the second folder. Raleigh. In 2016, shortly after co-founding Hargrove Cross, Malcolm Cross relocated to the firm's satellite office in Raleigh, North Carolina. Within 8 months, a similar pattern emerged. A client named Catherine Yates, 71, widowed, estate valued at approximately $1.2 million, experienced a series of 31 transfers from her trust account into an entity called Meridian Reserve Partners, registered in South Dakota. Total amount, $265,000. The authorized signatory on the receiving entity was, again, Diane Hargrove Ashford. She placed the Raleigh spreadsheet beside the Seattle spreadsheet. The columns were not identical, different dates, different amounts, different victims, but the architecture was the same. Sub-threshold transfers, shell entities in privacy-favorable states. A woman's signature on every receiving account. Ruth opened the third folder. Boston. You already know this one, she said, looking at me directly for the first time. Ashford Cross Capital Partners. South Dakota LLC. Nevada operating account. 42 transfers. $475,000. The authorized signatory is Diane Ashford. The beneficial owner is Malcolm Cross. The source is your joint marital accounts and, as of June, your son's education trust. 3 folders. 3 cities. 3 decades. Seattle, $380,000. David Langford, 2013 to 2015. Raleigh, $265,000. Catherine Yates, 2016 to 2018. Boston, $475,000. Thomas Ashford, Arling Arsène out Arling Arsu. Total across all 3. $1,120,000. And that figure did not include Scottsdale, the $310,000 Patricia Hargrove had revealed 4 days earlier. Ruth did not know about Scottsdale. When I told her, she closed her eyes for 2 full seconds, and then opened the leather portfolio she had brought with her and wrote the number down without comment. $1,430,000. 4 cities. 4 victims. 30 years. I began compiling these records in February of this year, Ruth continued. When the Boston pattern matched the Raleigh and Seattle patterns, same structuring methodology, same entity framework, same signatory, I understood that this was not opportunistic. This is an operational model. It has been refined over 3 decades, and it is designed to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of high-trust relationships. Marriages, widowed clients, family trusts. She paused. Her hands were flat on the table. Steady. I delayed coming forward because I needed to verify every transaction independently. I also needed to assess my own legal exposure. My counsel has confirmed that my role at Hargrove Cross was oversight, not facilitation, and that my records demonstrate I flagged the Raleigh anomalies internally. In 2018, Malcolm overruled my recommendation for an external audit. I have documentation of that as well. Vivian looked at me. Thomas, I'd like 24 hours to review Ruth's materials with the forensic team before we discuss next steps. The scope of this has expanded beyond family court. We may be looking at referrals to the SEC, the Massachusetts AG, and potentially the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I nodded. The 3 folders sat on the table between us. Seattle, Raleigh, Boston. Like chapters of a book I had not known existed until a spreadsheet arrived in my inbox 38 days ago. Each folder contained dates and numbers and routing codes, but what they really contained was a record of trust given, exploited, and converted into currency by 2 people who had built a system for doing exactly that. 24 hours, I said. I'll be here. Ruth stood. She gathered the folders and handed them to Courtney, who placed them in a secure filing case. At the door, Ruth turned back to me. Mr. Ashford. At the holiday party 2 years ago, I wanted to say something. I wasn't ready. You're ready now, I said. That's enough. She nodded once and left. I sat in the conference room for a long time after that. The city was visible through the window. Federal Street. The harbor beyond. The November sky pressing low and gray over everything. Somewhere in this city, Diane was in her mother's apartment in Cambridge, calculating her next position. Somewhere in Seattle, David Langford had rebuilt his retirement. Somewhere in Raleigh, Catherine Yates, 71, widowed, had lost $265,000 to a woman she had trusted with her husband's estate. And somewhere in Tokyo, my son was waiting to come home to a vineyard where the vines were dormant, and the soil was resting, and the new season had not yet begun. The mediation took place on Wednesday, January 22nd, at the offices of Brennan Shaw and Caldwell. 58 days after Ruth Nakamura placed 3 folders on the conference table. 96 days after an email arrived in my inbox at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday in October and changed the architecture of everything I believed about my life. The room was on the 14th floor, the same floor where I had first sat across from Vivian Caldwell and heard her say, "Don't confront her. Don't move money. Don't change a single habit." The same floor where Courtney Walsh had taught me to preserve documents without leaving a digital trail. The same floor where Ruth's folders had been cataloged, verified, and incorporated into a case file that now ran to 417 pages. Diane sat on the opposite side of the table. She had retained Lawrence Eaton, a senior partner at Eaton, Marsh & Cole, one of Boston's most established family law firms. Eaton was 63, silver-haired, and carried himself with the practiced calm of a man who had spent decades negotiating settlements that involved large numbers and damaged people. He had reviewed our financials, the forensic audit, Ruth's documentation, and the forged Ashford and Partners performance projection Ryan had photographed in June. His opening position, communicated to Vivian 3 days earlier, was that Diane would accept a structured settlement in exchange for Thomas's agreement not to pursue criminal referrals. Vivian had rejected that position in a single sentence. "My client does not trade accountability for convenience." The mediator was Judge Helen Ostrowski, retired 29 years on the Suffolk County bench, appointed by both sides. She opened the session at 9 a.m. with a statement I wrote down in the leather notebook. "This proceeding is confidential, non-binding until signed, and governed by the Massachusetts Uniform Mediation Act. The goal is resolution. The method is honesty." Honesty. I looked across the table at Diane. She was wearing a black blazer over a white blouse, the same combination she had worn to our 26th anniversary dinner at L'Espalier, when she had given me a Mont Blanc pen engraved with my initials and told me she was proud of everything we had built. Her face was composed. Her hands were still. She did not look at me. The session lasted 7 hours. I will not recount every exchange. Mediation is not a narrative. It is a negotiation. And negotiation is the slow, deliberate process of converting emotion into terms. But there were moments that mattered. At 10:14 a.m., Vivian presented the full forensic summary. 42 structured transfers totaling $475,000 through Ashford Cross Capital Partners, $52,000 diverted from Ryan's Education Trust via a forged performance projection, and the 3-city pattern documented by Ruth Nakamura, Seattle, $380,000, Raleigh, $265,000, and the previously unknown Scottsdale, $310,000, disclosed by Patricia Hargrove. Total documented diversions across 4 relationships, $1,482,000. Lawrence Eaton did not dispute the numbers. He disputed their relevance to the marital estate. Vivian responded that the pattern established intent, and intent determined equitable distribution under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 208. At 11:47 a.m., Diane spoke for the first time. Not to me, to the mediator. She said, "I am not contesting the transfers. I am requesting that the settlement reflect the full duration of the marriage and my contributions to the household over 26 years." Her voice was steady. Her vocabulary was precise. She was, even now, managing the terms. At 2:30 p.m., after a 90-minute recess during which I ate nothing and drank 2 cups of coffee in Vivian's office, the framework emerged. The $475,000 in documented transfers would be offset against Diane's equitable share of the marital estate. The Marlborough Street residence appraised at $2.1 million would be sold, with proceeds divided after the offset. The vineyard property at Finger Lakes, titled solely in my name since 2003, would remain mine. Ryan's education trust would be made whole from Diane's share before any other distribution. Diane would retain her personal retirement accounts and her equity interest in Hargrove Cross Financial Advisory, subject to whatever regulatory action followed Ruth Nakamura's disclosures to the SEC. At 4:22 p.m., Judge Ostrowski read the terms aloud. Both parties confirmed. Lawrence Eaton signed on Diane's behalf. I signed my own name, Thomas R. Ashford, on a line that was, for the first time in 96 days, exactly what it appeared to be. Diane stood. She gathered her coat and her bag. At the door, she paused not to look at me, but to adjust the collar of her blazer in the reflection of the glass partition. It was a gesture I had seen 10,000 times. A small vanity, a habit so familiar it was nearly invisible. And it was the last time I would see it. She left without a word. Lawrence Eaton followed. The door closed with the soft, pneumatic sound of a building designed to contain difficult conversations. Vivian placed her hand on the table. Not on my hand, not on the file, just on the surface between us, and said, "You did this well, Thomas." I closed the notebook. The vineyard was waiting. I drove north on a Saturday in early February. Route 90 west to the thruway, then south along the lake. The drive took 5 hours and 40 minutes. I did not play the radio. The windows were closed against the cold. The leather bag sat on the passenger seat, lighter now. The encrypted drive was still inside, but the notebook was finished. Every page filled, every date recorded, every number verified. The cottage was cold when I arrived. I turned on the heat, opened the kitchen window 2 inches, and made 1 cup of coffee. The vines outside were bare dormant, stripped down to the architecture of wood and wire that would hold the new growth when it came. In viticulture, this is called the resting phase. The plant is not dead. It is conserving. It is preparing for a season it cannot yet see, but has already committed to producing. I put on a coat, took the pruning shears from the shed, and walked into the eastern row. The soil was cold and dark beneath my boots. The lake was gray. The sky was the color of unpolished steel, and the work was simple. Cut what is dead, preserve what is sound, and trust that the structure you've maintained will carry what comes next. I started at the first vine and worked east, toward the ridge where the maples had once held their color in November, when Diane had suggested we walk and I had said yes, not knowing it would be the last time I stood in this row, without understanding what had been built beneath me. The shears were sharp, the cuts were clean. The vine did not resist. By the time the sun reached the ridge, I had finished the first row. 47 vines. I did not count them on purpose. But I noticed, and for the first time in 96 days, the number made me smile. I set the shears down, looked at the lake, and breathed. The new season was coming. I intended to be ready.